The storm had no business arriving in September. Isolde learned early in life that weather rarely observed propriety. It came when it wished, ruined what it chose, and left without apology. The rain that hammered Veltherin's cobblestones that Thursday evening felt personal. A cold, deliberate thing that drove itself sideways through the awnings and soaked the backs of guests who stood too close to the restaurant's tall windows. The Meridian occupied the ground floor of a building that had stood for 3 centuries in the city's oldest quarter. Its walls were dark oak. Its chandeliers were iron and candlelight. It was the kind of establishment that attracted people who believed atmosphere was a form of power, and so it also, inevitably, attracted the kind of people who actually possessed it. Isolde had worked there for 2 years. She was neither naive nor particularly curious about the clientele. She kept her head down, her orders correct, and her opinions silent. It was a discipline she had practiced since childhood, and it had served her well in the way that most disciplines do, by keeping her safe and keeping her small. The reservation for table 9 had come in at noon. No name, a number, a party of 1. The manager, Mr. Bowther, Fenn, had cleared the entire eastern alcove for it, which meant 12 covers gone for a single guest. He had not explained why. He had simply pressed his hands flat against the reservation ledger and told the staff that table 9 required absolute discretion, perfect silence, and that no one was to approach without being summoned. Isolde. He had chosen her specifically, which she hadn't known whether to consider flattering or ominous. "You'll take the east." She had nodded and said nothing. By 8 o'clock the guest had not arrived. The storm was worsening. The other tables were loud with the particular brightness of people who used conversation as shelter, and Isolde moved between them with practiced ease, refilling glasses, carrying plates, keeping her expression pleasantly neutral. It was Thomas who nearly ruined the evening before it had properly started. He was 7 years old, the son of the sous-chef, and he had the run of the back corridors during his father's late shifts. Isolde had seen him a dozen times. A small, serious boy with dark eyes who liked to press his face to the kitchen porthole and watch the flames. That evening he had wandered too far, past the service door out into the main dining room, and had frozen in the middle of the floor, transfixed by the stormlight through the glass. He had not seen the server coming. Alexander, carrying a full tray of crystal stemware, came around the corner at speed. The trajectory was simple and catastrophic. The boy, the tray, the tile floor, the glass. Isolde saw it happen in the way that accidents always unfold, slowly, despite themselves. She moved without thinking. She crossed the distance in 4 steps, dropped to one knee, and wrapped both arms around Thomas, pulling him sharply into her chest and turning her back to the collision. The tray struck her shoulder. Glass fell. She felt the sting along her upper arm before she registered the sound, a bright, percussive shatter that silenced the nearest tables. Thomas was trembling against her. She could feel his heartbeat, fast and shallow. "I have you," she said. Her voice was very calm. "Don't move yet, there's glass." She did not look up immediately. She was too focused on the boy, on making certain he was whole, on cataloguing the wreckage around them, on calculating the distance to safety. There was a cut on her forearm, just below the elbow, shallow. She registered it distantly. It was only when she finally raised her eyes that she understood something had changed in the room. He was at the entrance to the eastern alcove. She did not know when he had arrived. He had simply appeared, the way that certain presences do, without announcement, without door sounds or staff scrambling, as if the building had always contained him and had merely chosen now to reveal it. He stood very still in the shadow of the arch, wearing a dark coat that belonged to another era and an expression that belonged to no particular century at all. He was watching her, not the shattered glass, not the staff converging with apologies, not the manager who had appeared from nowhere and was already bowing at angles that suggested genuine fear. He was watching her. Isolde held the look for exactly 1 second before she dropped her gaze. She helped Thomas to his feet, steered him around the glass, pressed him gently in the direction of the kitchen, and turned to face the damage on the floor. Her arm was bleeding. Not seriously. She pressed her sleeve against it and reached for a fallen napkin. "Leave it." Fenn was at her elbow. His voice was barely above a breath. "Go to the east. He's asking for you." "He hasn't spoken," she said. "He doesn't need to." She looked once more toward the alcove. The man, if that was the word for something so still, so precisely contained, had withdrawn to his table. He sat with the particular posture of those accustomed to being the most dangerous thing in any given room. His hands rested on the white linen, perfectly composed. He had ordered nothing. He was simply waiting. Isolde pressed her sleeve harder against the cut and crossed the dining room toward him. The candlelight was different in the eastern alcove. Quieter, somehow, as though the flames had agreed to dim themselves. She stopped at the appropriate distance and met his eyes. They were the color of deep water in winter. Old. Impossibly old. "My name is Isolde," she said. "I'll be your server this evening. Can I bring you something?" He regarded her for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was low and unhurried, shaped by an accent that had outlived the country it came from. "A physician," he said, "for your arm." She blinked. "I'm fine." "You are bleeding," he said, "and I have a condition which makes that inconvenient for both of us." It was not, she realized, a request. The physician arrived within 11 minutes. Isolde had not asked how that was possible. The Meridian did not keep medical staff on retainer, and the nearest clinic was a 20-minute walk in good weather. She had simply been guided to a private anteroom by a man she had never seen before. Tall, gray-coated, with the deferential efficiency of someone paid a great deal to ask nothing, and had sat while her arm was cleaned and bandaged with materials produced from a leather case. She bore it in silence. The cut was superficial. 3 small lacerations from the glass, none requiring sutures. The physician worked quickly and said nothing, which suited her. What did not suit her was the man who stood in the doorway. He had not been invited into the anteroom. He had simply followed, and no one had thought to object. He leaned against the frame with his arms at his sides, and watched the physician work with an expression of careful attention, not concern precisely. Something older and more contained than concern. "You acted without hesitation," he said. Isolde looked up. He was going to be hurt. Many people observe that possibility without acting on it. "I was close enough." "You chose to be close enough," he said. "There is a distinction." She did not know what to say to that, so she said nothing. The physician finished his work, collected his case, and left the room without ceremony. The man in the doorway did not move. "Cassius," he said. She understood it was his name, offered without context or surname, as though those accessories had long since become unnecessary. "And you are Isolde?" "Yes. An old name. My mother's choice." Something shifted behind his eyes at that, brief, almost imperceptible, the way light changes in deep water when something passes beneath the surface. It resolved back into stillness before she could identify it. "The glass cut you," he said. "It did. And the blood." He paused with a precision that felt deliberate. It reached the floor. She looked at him more carefully. There was something in the way he said it, not prurient, not threatening, but careful in the way of a man who has learned to be careful around certain things, the way others learn to be careful around flames. "Is that significant?" she asked. "In this city," he said, "blood that falls publicly is significant to several parties who have no business being interested in a waitress." The word did not diminish her. She suspected he had not meant it to. "I don't understand what you mean." "You will." He pushed off the doorframe. The movement was small, contained, but it changed the density of the room in a way she couldn't explain. "Tonight I want you to go home by cab, not on foot, not through the lower quarter, a cab, directly." He produced a card from his coat and held it out. The card bore only a number. "You will call that if anything delays you." She looked at the card but did not take it immediately. "Why?" "Because 3 individuals entered this restaurant in the hour before I arrived and left again when I sat down. They were not here to dine." The back of her neck went cold. "Were they here for you?" she asked. "Possibly," he said, "and now possibly for you as well. Blood draws attention in this city, particularly blood of a certain quality." "What quality does my blood have?" He held her gaze with an expression that was, she thought, the closest he probably came to reluctance. "I am not certain yet," he said. "That is what concerns me." She took the card. He left the anteroom without further ceremony, and she sat for a moment in the sudden quiet, pressing the card between her fingers. It was heavy stock. No letterhead. The number was written in ink so dark it was almost black. She returned to the dining room. Fen intercepted her immediately, eyes wide with the focused anxiety of a man trying to contain several emergencies simultaneously. "He has arranged for a card to take you home," Fen told her, "at the end of your shift. He has also settled the evening's bill for the entire restaurant." Isolde stopped walking. The entire restaurant. Every table. Every cover, including the ones he never sat near. Fane's voice dropped to barely a sound. "Miss Vane, that man is Cassius Aldenvere." She did not know the name. She watched Fen's face register that fact with something between surprise and relief. "He is the head of the Aldenvere line," Fen said carefully. "The oldest family in Veltherin, perhaps in the country." He hesitated. "Perhaps older than the country." "That isn't possible," she said. "I have worked in this building for 19 years, Fen said. "He has dined at table 9 7 times. He has not aged." She looked toward the eastern alcove. The table was empty. The candles burned steadily, as though no guest had ever disturbed the air around them. "Go finish your section," Fen said. "And please, Isolde, take the car." She did not dream that night, which was unusual. She lay in the dark of her small apartment and listened to the storm diminish, and she thought about a man with winter-colored eyes who had watched her bleed without moving, as though the restraint had cost him something. She thought about the 3 people who had stood in the restaurant and then left. She thought about the weight of old names and why her mother had chosen one. In the morning, there were flowers on her doorstep. Not a card, not a note. Simply a bundle of white blooms she did not recognize, tied with black ribbon, left as precisely as a statement of intent. She did not know whether they were a comfort or a warning. She suspected, with a quiet dread that settled somewhere behind her sternum, that they were both. The flowers were called Morvenelle. She discovered this after 2 hours of searching in the city's botanical archive, which occupied the ground floor of a library that smelled of cedar and damp stone. The archivist, a woman of considerable age who seemed genuinely pleased to have a question that required effort, identified the blooms from a hand-drawn illustration in a text that predated current botanical classification. "They don't grow anymore," the woman said, turning the image toward Isolde. "Not naturally. The last recorded cultivation was in 1743, in the gardens of—" She squinted at the margin notation, "the Aldenvere estate." Isolde kept her expression neutral. "What do they signify?" "In the old language? Roughly, I have taken notice of you and I have told no one." The archivist tilted her head. "It's a very specific meaning." Protective in tone. Not romantic exactly, more like a formal acknowledgement of debt. "Debt," Isolde repeated. "He owes you something, or believes he does." The woman closed the book gently. "Where did you find them?" "My doorstep," Isolde said, and watched the archivist become very still. "Then someone knows where you live," the woman said, "and wanted you to know that they know." She did not mean it unkindly. It was simply the truth, and truth was the archivist's vocation. Isolde thanked her and walked back through the library into the pale morning. The storm had left the streets clean and cold, and the old quarter of Veltherin had the particular quality it always did after rain. Washed, slightly ancient, as though time had been polished and laid out for inspection. She had a shift that evening. She considered, briefly, calling in absent. She considered the card in her coat pocket and the number on it. She considered the 3 people who had left the restaurant when Cassius Aldenvere sat down, and she thought about the way he had watched her with that expression she could not name. Not hunger, not calculation, but something that contained both and was controlled into a third thing entirely. She went to work. The evening was quiet. Fen said nothing about the previous night. The other staff moved around her with the particular carefulness of people who sense something has changed in the atmosphere and don't wish to be first to name it. He arrived at 9 o'clock, not at table 9 this time. He came through the main entrance, and he did not sit. He stopped just inside the door and looked across the room at her with the same stillness that had unsettled her the night before. The stillness of something that has no need to move because it is, already, in all meaningful senses, arrived. She crossed to him. "You're not here to eat," she said. "No." "Then why?" "Because you went to the Botanical Archive this morning," he said, "and the archivist is known to me and sent a message, and because I wanted to ensure you understood the flowers before you spent the day misinterpreting them." She absorbed this. "You had me watched." "I had the situation watched," he said with a distinction she suspected was real to him. "There is a difference. The 3 individuals from last night were confirmed associates of a collector called Marin Voss. She acquires rare bloodlines." The phrasing landed strangely. "I'm a waitress," Isolde said. "You are the last surviving daughter of the Vane line," he said, "which is something you do not know and which I will explain to you properly if you will give me 1 hour of your time in a location that is not a public dining room." She stared at him. "Your mother's name," he said quietly. "What was her full name?" "Ilara Vane." Something moved through his face. Grief, she thought, but grief that had been carried for so long it had become structural, part of the architecture of him. "I knew her," he said, "a long time ago, before you were born." He paused. "She made me promise not to look for you unless there was cause. Last night provided cause." The restaurant continued around them, plates, conversation, the percussion of ordinary life. And Isolde stood in the middle of it and felt the strange, vertiginous sensation of a floor giving way to reveal there had always been a deeper room below. 1 hour, she said. "I have a car outside. I'll need to tell Fen." "He already knows," Cassius said, and she did not doubt it. The car was long and dark and smelled of old leather. He sat across from her, not beside her, which she noted. A choice. The city moved past the windows, its old stones, its iron bridges, its river that caught the lamplight in fragments. "My mother," she said. "How long ago did you know her?" 31 years. Isolde was 28. "Then you knew her before I was born," she said carefully. "Yes, was she?" She stopped, started again. "Was she part of whatever world you belong to?" "She was born into it," he said. "She chose to leave it. She chose to give you a life outside of it. She was." A pause that held real weight. She was very determined, and she was right to be cautious. The Vane bloodline carries what my kind call a resonance, a quality that amplifies certain things in us. It was the reason my coven law once forbade contact with your family. "And now?" He looked out the window at the dark river. "Now Marin Voss has your address," he said, "and I have a promise to keep." She did not sleep well. This was not new. What was new was the reason, not the ordinary restlessness that came with overwork and thin walls and a city's nighttime sounds, but rather the specific, unquiet feeling of knowing that the shape of her life had been a kind of container, carefully constructed around her by her mother, by time, and that the container had cracked. She kept returning to one sentence. "She made me promise not to look for you unless there was cause." Her mother had died 6 years ago. A quiet death. A winter illness. In the small apartment 3 districts from the one Isolde now occupied. She had left behind very little. Some furniture. A collection of pressed flowers that Isolde had not been able to name. A single locked box for which no key was ever found. And a daughter who had learned by example and by necessity how to be invisible. She had not questioned it. Invisibility had seemed reasonable, sensible, a quality to be cultivated rather than examined. She thought about the pressed flowers now, and the locked box. At 7 in the morning she dressed and went to the storage unit she paid 20 per month for, the one that held what remained of her mother's things, and she stood in front of a stack of cardboard boxes until she found the one labeled Misk Kitchen that she had never opened because her mother had told her, twice, that it contained nothing important. She opened it. Inside, beneath a layer of folded dish towels, was a flat tin case. Inside the tin, papers, folded and old and handled many times. And beneath the papers, wrapped in gray cloth, a key. She recognized it. Small, ornate, iron dark. She had not seen it in 6 years, but she recognized it, the way you recognize the thing you have been told not to look for. She took the box home. The locked chest was under her bed, where she had placed it after her mother's death, and not opened, not touched, in the years since. The key fit with the particular precision of something made for exactly this. She turned it. The chest opened. Inside, a journal, a bundle of letters tied with cord, and a photograph. Not digital, actual photographic paper, old style, of a woman who was not her mother standing beside a man who was. The man was Cassius Aldenvere. She recognized him with the cold certainty of someone who has looked closely at a face and filed it without knowing why. He was unchanged. Precisely, impossibly unchanged. Dark coat, winter-colored eyes, that particular quality of stillness. The woman beside him was younger, with a brightness in her face that made Isolda's chest constrict in a way she didn't immediately identify as grief. And then did. She opened the journal. Her mother's handwriting. The first entry dated 32 years ago. He is not what I expected. None of this is. They told me the Aldenvere lord was cold and removed and contractual, and he is all of these things. But underneath them, so far underneath that I wonder if he has ever had occasion to look there himself, there is something like loneliness, an old loneliness, the kind that has given up expecting resolution. Isolda sat on the floor beside her bed with her back against the wall and read for 4 hours. The picture that assembled itself was not simple. Her mother had been brought to the Aldenvere court as a keeper, a mortal with bloodline resonance whose presence stabilized certain aspects of the vampire lord's discipline. Not a prisoner, not a servant, something between a guardian and a counterweight. She had stayed 2 years. She had left when she discovered she was pregnant. The father was not Cassius. That much was plain and plainly stated. But the journal was clear on something else, that Cassius had known, and had kept the promise her mother had asked of him, and had watched from a distance that was not safe for 30 years, because her mother had believed distance was the only protection she could offer. He will come if she is ever in danger, her mother had written in one of the final entries. I have asked him not to come otherwise. He agreed with that particular stillness he has, where the agreement costs him something he doesn't show, and I understood that I was asking him to do something very hard. I asked anyway. She needs to be a girl first, a person first, not a piece on a board. Isolda pressed the journal flat against her knees and looked at the ceiling. She thought about a 7-year-old boy in the path of a falling tray. She thought about the 3 people who had watched her from across a restaurant and then left. She thought about a man who had stood in a doorway and watched a physician bandage her arm with an expression of precise, disciplined restraint. She thought about what it cost to keep a promise for 30 years. She called the number on the card. He answered on the second ring. No greeting, simply the sound of him, present and still even over the phone. I found the journal, she said. A pause. I see. And the photograph. Another pause, this one different in quality, weighted, careful. I should explain, he said. I think you probably should, she agreed. This evening, he said. Not by phone. He paused again. Are you well? The question arrived with a gentleness that did not fit the rest of him, or rather did fit some part of him. She was only beginning to understand existed. The part that had kept a promise in silence for 30 years. I don't know, she said. Which was true. That is an honest answer, he said. I'll come at 7. She looked at the photograph still in her other hand. Her mother's bright young face, the unchanged man beside her, standing with careful distance between them. She was fond of you, Isolda said. The journal is clear. Yes, he said. And then, quiet, unexpectedly, I was fond of her. She didn't know what to say. She said nothing. Neither did he, for a long moment, and the silence between them was not empty. He came at 7 o'clock in the same dark car, and he took her somewhere she had not expected. Not a restaurant, not his office if he had one, but a house. It stood in the deep west of the old quarter, behind a gate that seemed less like iron and more like a decision. You could pass through it only if you were meant to. The house itself was tall and narrow, sandwiched between 2 much younger buildings as though it had refused to acknowledge their construction. Its windows were tall and dark, Its facade was pale stone, worn smooth by centuries. "Is this?" she began. "It belongs to the Aldenvale line," he said. "It is not where I primarily reside. I use it in the city." He opened the gate and did not touch her, held it open from the side, gave her room to walk through ahead of him. "The city property is more defensible than your apartment. You're moving me here? I am offering you the option," he said, "with full understanding that you may refuse." She looked at the house. She thought about Marin Voss, and addresses and 3 watchers who had left when Cassius sat down. "Just for now," she said. "However long you require." Inside, the house was warmer than she expected, not cold in the way of neglected places. It had been kept. The rooms were furnished without ostentation, clean-lined and dark-wooded, with the accumulated quality of space that has been inhabited by someone careful for a very long time. Books on every surface, art on the walls that she suspected was original and not in any catalog. He brought her to a sitting room and built a fire, manually, she noted, with a competence that spoke of long practice, and then sat in a chair across the hearth from her with his hands on his knees, and the particular composure of someone who has been preparing to have conversation for a long time and is now making himself be still for it. "Your mother came to the court because of an agreement between our families," he began. "The vein line has existed in relationship to mine for 300 years. Not subjugation, arrangement. Keepers of the bloodline resonance have always been valued, always protected. Your mother was the last of the direct line when she came to us." "And the resonance," Isolde said, "what does it do?" He considered the question with evident care. "Vampires of great age develop certain intensities," he said. "The thirst becomes, not greater but more complex, more difficult to govern. The resonance in particular bloodlines acts as a kind of anchor, a presence that makes the discipline easier to maintain." He looked at the fire. "Your mother's presence in my household made certain things quieter. It is not a pleasant thing to explain, because it makes you sound like a utility." "You explained it anyway," she said. "You asked. Were you ever, did you—" She stopped, reformulated. "Was it ever more than that? With my mother?" The fire moved. He did not. "She was important to me," he said. "I believe she knew that, what form it took." He paused, and she had the sense that he was choosing words with the care of someone handling something that could be broken. "I had governed that household alone for a long time. She brought a quality of— she was a good person. Genuinely good. The kind that reminds you what that word means." He stopped. "I did not complicate her life with what I felt. She had enough complications." Isolde looked at her hands in her lap. "She never told me about any of this," she said. "No." "Did that hurt you, that she left?" The question left her before she'd decided to ask it. She felt the slight indiscretion of it even as it landed, but she did not take it back. He looked at her for a moment. "Yes," he said. Simply, without inflection, as though the simplicity was the only honest way to say it. She nodded. She looked at the fire. "And now, I am here," she said, "and I have the resonance. You have it more strongly than she did. Which is," he paused, "unusual. It typically diminishes with each generation outside the court. In you, it appears to have done the opposite. Is that why Marin Voss wants me?" "She collects bloodline resonances," he said. "She extracts them. The individuals do not survive the process." The fire crackled. Isolde kept her face composed. The fear was there. She could feel it like cold water behind her ribs. But she had always been better at holding things internally than showing them. And this, at least, was familiar ground. "Then I am in danger," she said. "Yes. And you intend to prevent that." "I made a promise," he said. "I intend to honor it." She looked up at him then. He was watching her with that expression, the one she had first seen across a restaurant dining room, that quality of attention that was neither calculation nor desire but contained both and was something older and more controlled than either. "Why?" she said. "Not because of the promise. Why do you care whether the promise is kept?" He held her gaze with the patience of something that has spent centuries learning to be patient. Because she was important to me, he said, and you are her daughter, and because I watched you wrap your arms around a frightened child without a moment of hesitation, and whatever debt I might have calculated before that moment became something else after it. He stood and went to the fire and adjusted one of the logs, a small, purely practical action, and she watched him and thought, he has loved people carefully and at distance, and long past when they could know it. It was a specific kind of loneliness. She understood it better than she would have liked. I'll stay, she said. He turned, nodded once. I'll have your things brought in the morning. 3 days passed in a careful quiet. Isolde had taken leave from the Meridian. Thaon had not objected, had in fact looked relieved in the way of a man who has been holding a door against a wind for too long. She settled into the West Quarter house with the same methodical restraint with which she handled most things, unpacking only what she needed, keeping to her own rooms in the mornings, and navigating the shared spaces with a politeness calibrated to acknowledge without imposing. Cassius was easier to share space with than she had expected. He did not hover. He did not explain himself unnecessarily. He was present in the way of deep water. There, felt, but not intrusive. He read. He wrote. She did not ask what. He spoke to people by phone in languages she partly recognized and partly didn't, and when he put the phone down, his expression was always the same, composed, slightly remote, sealed. He had staff, 2 of them, quiet and efficient and clearly not surprised by anything. They cooked, they maintained the house, and they regarded Isolde with the particular benign neutrality of people who had seen many things come and go in this household and intended to outlast the situation as they had outlasted all others. On the 4th morning, a man arrived. Isolde was in the library, the east-facing room, floor-to-ceiling shelves, the smell of old paper. When she heard the voice, male, sharp, carrying the accent of the courthouses to the north, she could not make out words, only tone, and the tone was displeased. She stayed where she was. 15 minutes later, Cassius appeared in the library doorway. He looked, she thought, like a man who had just been rained on and was choosing not to mention it. That was Aldrich Neven, he said. A representative of the Coven Council. She waited. They are aware that you are here, he said, and they have concerns. About me. About my protection of you specifically. Coven law historically prohibited extended contact between the Aldenvare line and bloodline resonance keepers outside of formal arrangement. He paused. Your mother's departure was, technically, a breach of that arrangement. You were never formally registered as existing. My mother didn't register me as existing? She did not tell the council she was with child when she left, he said. Which was not inadvertent. She was protecting you from exactly this kind of interest. And now the council knows. Marin Voss filed a claim, he said, with the council, a counterclaim against my protection. His voice was entirely level, but she had begun to learn the particular quality of his stillness, how it became more precise when he was containing something. It is a legal maneuver. It means the council must formally evaluate whether my protection of you is appropriate under current law, or whether you fall under their governance as an unregistered asset. The word was cold and deliberate, and she could see that he had chosen it to be those things, to give her the clear picture rather, than soften it. An asset, she said. That is the council's language, not mine. She closed the book she had been holding. And what happens during the evaluation? A trial of claim, he said. Formal, before the full council, within a fortnight. And if they rule in Voss's favor, they will not, he said. It was the first time she had heard him speak with that quality, not confidence exactly, but finality, the tone of something that has already decided the outcome and is simply working backward toward it. You can't be certain, she said. I am the eldest on the council, he said. I am not its servant. I have abided by its rulings for 3 centuries because the rulings have generally been sound. If this ruling is not sound, I will not abide by it. She looked at him. That would cause trouble for you, she said. Yes. And you've already decided you don't care. He met her gaze and she saw it again. That thing beneath the stillness, the thing she was still learning to name. Your mother, he said, trusted me with the most important thing she had. She did not ask that lightly, and I did not accept it lightly. Whether the council agrees with my actions is not the primary concern." She stood up from her chair. The morning light came through the tall window and fell between them, and she thought about her mother writing in a journal. "There is something like loneliness, the kind that has given up expecting resolution. I want to understand the trial," she said. "The process, what I need to know." "I can teach you," he said. "Then teach me." He nodded once. Something shifted in his expression. Not warmly, not yet, but in the way that a locked room shifts when the key turns. A change in the quality of what is inside, not immediately visible. "We have 2 weeks," he said. "We'll begin this afternoon." She spent the afternoon learning the structure of Coven law from the man who had helped write 3 generations of it, seated across from him at the long library table with books between them that predated her mother's mother, and she concentrated fiercely on everything he said, because concentration was the thing she was best at, and because it was better, far better, than thinking about how careful he was, when he spoke to her, never to let her see how much it cost him that she was there at all. She was her mother's daughter in the end. She noticed things. He had not expected the resonance to be this strong. That was the honest truth. And Cassius had spent long enough in his own company to be honest with himself about most things. He had expected, planned for, accounted for, a woman with a bloodline quality, some measurable degree of the vein resonance, enough to explain why Marin Voss had sent agents to a restaurant. He had not planned for the particular way it manifested in Isolde, not as a passive quality but as something almost active, something in the way she was present, still, internally, composed. That silenced the older parts of him in ways no external discipline had managed in decades. He was careful with this knowledge. He filed it away with the same precision he applied to everything that could become a problem if handled carelessly. And he told no one. The Coven Council convened in the lower hall of the Aldenvere estate, the one outside the city, 40 minutes by car through the low hills. 12 seated. He stood at the head because he was always standing at the head, and the weight of that position was structural now, part of his skeleton. Marin Voss sat to the right of the neutral arbiters. She was ancient, thin, and dressed in something pale that made her look like she had been pressed and dried. She watched Isolde enter the hall with an expression of uncomplicated interest, the way you look at something you intend to acquire. Isolde entered behind him. She had dressed carefully. Dark, simple, no jewelry, and she carried herself with that quality he had observed from the beginning, not boldness, not performance, but a genuine, controlled composure that was entirely her own. She had not asked him what to expect beyond the procedural. She had absorbed the procedural and made herself ready. It was, he thought, exactly what her mother would have done. The arbiters read the claim. Marin Voss presented her case with practiced precision. The Vane bloodline had been in informal relationship with the Coven since the 17th century. The departure of Alara Vane without formal severance constituted a continuing bond. Isolde, as her daughter, was therefore subject to council governance and placement. He listened. He let her finish completely. Then he presented the counter-argument, which he had written in its entirety and did not need to read. The Vane bloodline was a free lineage that had consented to relationship, never subjugation. Consent dissolved with the individual and did not pass to descendants. Marin Voss's claim was a resource acquisition disguised as illegality, and he, as eldest council member, was invoking the protector right, an ancient provision, older than most of the council members, which granted extended protection to any mortal whose bloodline was demonstrated to be threatened by a Coven member's action. The hall was quiet. He looked at Marin Voss. She was looking at Isolde. "The protector right," said the chief arbiter, "requires a demonstrated bond between the claimant and the protected." "I witnessed her risk herself to protect a child," he said. 3 hours after, individuals working for Marin Voss had confirmed her address. The causal chain is sufficient. "The protector right also requires," the arbiter continued, with the careful tone of someone reading from a long memory, "a declaration of the protector's intent. Historically, that is a declaration of claim," Cassius said. "I am aware." The word claim in this context had a specific meaning. It was not ownership. It was older than that, a declaration that the protector was binding themselves to the protected, formally, under coven observation. A social contract with legal teeth. The hall was very quiet. He had known this moment would come. He had been measuring the space between necessity and choice since the night he had watched her pull a child to safety with her own blood on her arm. He had argued himself through it with the methodical rigor he applied to everything, and he had arrived, as he always did, at the only position he could hold with integrity. He turned to look at Isolde. She met his eyes. Her expression was composed, but he could see, because he had been learning to read her, as one learns to read a language, the controlled alertness beneath it. He turned back to the council. "Under the protector right," he said, "I declare formal claim upon Isolde Vane. She is under Oldenveer protection. Any further action by Marin Voss or her associates constitutes direct interference with this council's eldest member and will be treated accordingly." The arbiters conferred in the low, dense murmur of people who already know the outcome. Marin Voss stood. Her expression was the careful blank of someone recalculating. "You would bind yourself," she said, "for a waitress." "I would bind myself," he said, "for a woman of the Vane line, whose family has been allied to mine for 3 centuries, whose mother entrusted me with her protection, and who demonstrated more moral courage in 3 seconds of action than anything your claim document contains." He held her gaze. "Sit down, Marin." She sat. The arbiters ruled in favor of the protector claim. He did not look at Isolde until they were outside, in the cold night air, and then he looked at her sidelong, measuring. "You're angry," he said. "I'm not angry," she said carefully. "I'm recalibrating. I should have explained the declaration requirement before we entered." "Yes," she said, "you should have." A pause. "What does the declaration actually mean, for you?" He was quiet for a moment. "It means," he said, "that I cannot disregard you, even if I wish to." She looked at him. "Did you wish to?" she asked. He did not answer immediately, and in the silence of that non-answer, she seemed to find something, not a comfort, but an orientation, a sense of true north. "No," he said finally, "I did not." The weeks that followed the council ruling had their own weather. Isolde was aware of something changing in the texture of the house. Not dramatically, not in ways she could point to with certainty, but the way coastal people are aware of pressure shifts before storms, in the quality of silence, in the particular angles of attention. He had always been careful with distance. She understood this now as a structural habit, the physical space he kept, the way he positioned himself in doorways rather than rooms, the way his hands remained still and at his sides even when instinct might have suggested otherwise. She had thought, at first, that it was simply his manner. She understood now that it was governance. He was governing something, and she was adjacent to the thing being governed. She did not know what to do with that understanding, so she continued doing what she had always done. She worked, she read, she occupied her space with the careful minimum of a person who has always understood herself to be slightly temporary. But there was the morning she had come downstairs early before the staff arrived, and found him standing at the library window in the early gray light, with a book closed in his hands and an expression on his face that she did not see at any other time, exposed, in some particular way, by the unobserved moment. He had heard her, of course. He always heard her. He had turned before she finished crossing the threshold, and the expression had closed neatly and completely, back into its usual composure, but she had seen it. And there was the evening, a fortnight after the council trial, when she had gone to the kitchen to make tea and cut her hand on a broken cup, a stupid domestic accident, a moment's inattention, and she had pressed a cloth against it and gone looking for the first aid kit, and she had found him already in the corridor, standing with the stillness of someone who had heard something they were trying not to react to. He saw the cloth. He saw her face. "Sit down," he said. "It's not, please," he said, and the please had a quality that made her sit. He dressed the cut with the precise, economic movements of someone who had done this before, many times, she suspected, over many decades. He did not look at her face while he worked. He looked at her hand. but his jaw was tight in a way she had learned to associate with restraint in him, and his hands, which were perfectly steady, exerted a care that was not strictly medically necessary. When he was done, he did not move away immediately. He held her hand between both of his, lightly, the way you hold something that could be startled, and looked at the bandage. The contact was small, incidental almost, but she was aware of it with a precision that was disproportionate to its size. "Better?" he said. "Yes." Her voice was entirely steady. She was proud of this. He released her hand and stood. She looked up at him. He was looking at a point slightly past her shoulder, with the expression of a man recollecting himself from a considerable distance. "The resonance," she said quietly. "When I bleed, does it?" "Yes," he said. It was a complete answer. "Does it make things difficult?" He considered the question with the seriousness he brought to everything. "It makes things present," he said, "that I managed to keep at a distance otherwise." He met her eyes briefly. "You should not feel responsible for that. It is my discipline to maintain, not your behavior to modify." "I'm not frightened," she said. She wanted that to be clear. "I know," he said. "That, frankly, makes it harder." She absorbed this. He moved to the window. "Your mother," she said, "did it affect her similarly? The resonance?" "In a different way," he said. "Hers was quieter, like a low note, constant. Yours is," he paused, "more complex. It carries something additional, a quality I have not encountered in the line before." "Is that why Voss wanted me more than she might have wanted my mother?" "Partly." He turned. "And partly because you were young and untrained, and she calculated you would be easier to acquire." She was wrong. Something moved in his face, the beginning of an expression that resolved quickly into something more neutral. But she caught the edge of it. She was wrong, he agreed. She stood from the chair. They were close, suddenly. Closer than the distance he normally maintained, because she had stood and the geography of the room had not accounted for it. He did not step back. She did not step forward. "Cassius," she said. Yes. She wanted to say something that accurately reflected what she understood to be happening, what had been happening, she thought, since a restaurant and a storm and a boy and a tray of broken glass. But she did not have the language for it yet. It was too new, and she was too careful. "Thank you," she said, "for the hand." He held her gaze for a moment, then he nodded once and moved to the door, maintaining the propriety that was so much a part of him that she suspected it was indistinguishable now from tenderness. "Good night, Isolde," he said. "Good night," she said. She stood in the kitchen after he left and looked at the bandaged hand and thought about his hands holding it, and thought about the enormous effort of care that chose to express itself in the most minimal, careful, adequate ways possible. And she felt something shift inside her, quietly, without drama, toward him. It had been shifting for a while. She understood that now. Marin Voss did not accept the council ruling. This was not surprising. What was surprising was the method, not a legal appeal but a direct action, swift and precise, on an evening when the household was reduced to Isolde and the cook, Petra, who was in the cellar taking inventory because Cassius had gone to meet with the council's eldest arbiter about a procedural matter. Isolde was in the library when she heard Petra fall. Not a crash, a soft, deliberate sound, like someone sitting down unexpectedly. She was at the door in 4 steps and in the corridor in 5, and she found Petra seated against the wall with her eyes glazed and her pulse visible at her throat, and she understood, with the cold efficiency of someone who has spent weeks being educated about the world she had been born adjacent to, that this was a suppression glamour, which meant someone was in the house. She did not run. She moved back to the library, closed the door without sound, and found the phone on the desk and dialed. He answered before the second ring. "Someone is in the house," she said. Her voice was very quiet, very even. "Petra is down, suppression glamour. I'm in the library." A pause of perhaps 2 seconds. "Do not leave the library," he said. "The door has a bolt. Use it. I will be there in 9 minutes." "How many of them do you think?" 1 or 2, he said. 1 or 2, he said. "Voss sends small groups. I also." He said her name the way he said it sometimes, with a weight she had begun to notice, a quality that made it sound like more than a name. Stay on the phone. She bolted the door. She went to the far side of the room to the shelves, because shelves were more substantial than walls and cover was cover. She held the phone against her ear and breathed steadily. She heard them try the door. Once, then again. A pause, then the sound of something she couldn't classify, a tool perhaps, or the particular sound of someone applying force. They're trying the door, she said quietly. 9 minutes, he said. She did not tell him she was afraid. She was, but the fear was the manageable kind, cold and precise, not the overwhelming kind, the kind that makes you stupid. She looked at the room around her and counted exits. 1 door, 2 windows, both 3 floors up and facing the rear garden. The bolt held. 6 minutes. 7. She heard nothing further from the corridor, which was either reassuring or alarming. She heard the window shatter from 2 floors below. Downstairs, she said. I'm 40 seconds away, he said. And then she heard something else, the particular silence that precedes a presence, and the door handle turned, and then the bolt gave, not from force, but from the particular mechanical giving of metal under glamour, which she had read about in the library books and had hoped to never experience, and the door opened. There were 2 of them. Neither was Voss. They were young. Young for their kind, she corrected herself, still learning the vocabulary, and they moved with the efficient certainty of professionals given a clear objective. They looked at her. She stood up from behind the shelf. She was not going to crouch and wait. She will not honor a council ruling, Isolde said, meaning Voss. Her voice was clear. That is an offense against your own governance. The first one moved. Fast, but not as fast as the window behind them, which came in from the outside with a sound like a decision. Cassius arrived through it. She had understood, intellectually, what he was. She had read the journals, heard the council, lived in his house for weeks, and felt the particular quality of what he contained. But she had not, she realized, actually seen it. She had only seen the part he chose to show, the governance, the restraint, the careful distance. This was not that. It lasted perhaps 30 seconds. She pressed herself flat against the shelf and did not look away because looking away seemed, in some fundamental sense, wrong. He had spent a great deal of effort managing what he was for her benefit, and she thought the least she could do was see him clearly. It was controlled. That was what she noticed most. Even this was controlled. He did not harm either of them beyond what was necessary to stop them. He subdued, immobilized, and he did it with the absolute economy of something that has had centuries to refine the difference between necessary force and excess. When it was over, he turned to her. He was very still. His eyes had changed color, dark, where they had been winter pale, and there was blood on his hand that was not his. He looked at her with the specific expression of someone expecting to see fear, bracing for it. "Are you hurt?" he said. "No," she said. "Isolde, I'm not hurt." She stepped away from the shelf and crossed the room toward him, not close enough to crowd him. She was learning his distances, his geometries of comfort, but close enough to make the choice visible. "And I'm not frightened. Of you." He looked at her for a long moment. The dark had not left his eyes entirely yet. "You should be," he said. "Probably," she agreed. "I'm not. Why?" She thought about it. Thought about the journal, and the flowers, and a cut hand held between careful palms, and 30 years of a promise kept in silence. "Because I've seen how much effort you put into not being frightening," she said. "And I think that's more significant than the thing you're afraid I'll see." He was quiet for a long time. The dark in his eyes receded slowly, returning to the winter color she had come to know. "Your mother," he said finally, "said something very similar to me once, 30 years ago. She was perceptive, Isolde said." "Yes," he said, "so are you." He moved to stand beside her and look at the state of the library, the door off its bolt, the broken window below sending cold air through the floor, and she stood beside him and looked at the same damage, and neither of them moved well from the other. Marin Voss was brought before the full council 4 days later. Cassius had filed the complaint with the precision and thoroughness of someone who had spent 3 centuries watching legal instruments be used as weapons and had learned, in consequence, to be better with them than anyone else. The charge was interference with the declared protector claim, unauthorized entry of a coven member's property, use of suppression glamour on a non-consenting mortal, and direct challenge to council authority. Isolde was present. She had not been required to attend. She had chosen to. She sat in the gallery rather than at the floor, which gave her a perspective she found clarifying. The council below, arranged in their old hierarchy. Cassius at the head, standing as he always stood, with the particular composure that was neither coldness nor indifference but something harder. The composure of someone who has decided exactly where the line is, and Marin Voss, seated now without the uncomplicated interest of their first meeting, recalculating behind her careful expression. The proceedings were formal and thorough and lasted 2 hours. At the end, the council voted to revoke Marin Voss's council seat and place her operations under external governance for a period of no less than a decade. It was, Isolde gathered from the faces around her, a significant sanction. Not the most severe available. But Cassius had not argued for the most severe. He had argued for the proportionate, had actually been more measured in his prosecution than several other council members, who had apparently held long-standing concerns about Voss that they were now pleased to articulate. When the hall cleared, she waited for him at the entrance. He came through the tall doors and stopped when he saw her. She thought she had become reasonably fluent in his expressions by now, and what she saw in this one was something she hadn't seen clearly before. Relief. Unguarded for a moment, he had not been certain it would go this way. "It's over," she said. "This part," he agreed. He came to stand beside her in the entrance, and they walked out together into the evening, into the cold air and the long stone drive. There will be others with interests in the vein resonance. Not Voss specifically, but the interest doesn't vanish with the individual. I know. The protector claim is a formal shield, but Cassius. She stopped walking. He stopped, turned to look at her. She had been thinking about what she wanted to say for 4 days. She had applied her customary method, patience, clarity, restraint. And she had arrived at something that was the truth and was manageable, which were the 2 criteria she applied to things before she said them aloud. "The claim is formal," she said. "I understand what it means legally. I want to ask what it means to you." He was quiet. "I know what it costs," she said. "I read enough of the council documents. The protector claim is irrevocable for a period of no less than a century, unless the protected party formally releases it. You would have known that when you declared." "Yes," he said. "You bound yourself for a century," she said, "without asking me." "I could not ask you," he said. "The declaration had to come from me, or it was not valid under the provision." "I know." She looked at him steadily. "I'm not challenging the legality. I'm asking what it means to you, not to the council. Not to the protector provision. To you." He held her gaze for a long moment. "I am asking you," he said finally, "to allow me to be responsible for your safety, not because of your bloodline, not because of a promise to your mother, which has already been honored, but because," he stopped, seemed to weigh the next words with great care, "because I find that the prospect of a life in which you are not in it is one I am no longer willing to organize myself around." She absorbed this. The evening was very still around them. "That is a very controlled way to say something important," she said. "I am a very controlled person." "I know." She looked at his face, the ancient, careful, contained face of someone who has learned that honesty is a form of courage and has been practicing it in small, deliberate increments for longer than she could fully fathom. "I'm not releasing the claim," she said. "I want to be clear about that." Something shifted in his expression. Quietly, the way a locked room shifts. "I am asking for time," she continued. "I have spent my entire life slightly outside of everything, slightly unaware of what I actually am, and I would like to understand it properly before I make any further decisions. About myself. About," she paused, "the things that appear to be happening." "That is more than reasonable," he said. "I will be in the house," she said. In the city, and I would like to continue the library sessions. There is considerably more I want to understand about Coven history. Yes, he said, and I would like you to be less careful with the distances, she said. Not dramatically, just, I am aware that you have been managing them deliberately, and I would like you to stop calculating on my behalf. He was quiet for a moment. Then, for the first time, she saw him almost smile. It was a small thing, barely visible, like the first light at the edge of a very long night. I'll try, he said. She nodded. They began walking again, side by side in the cold evening air, and the distance between them was smaller than it had been, and neither of them moved to increase it. The city was below them, spread out in its old light, its iron bridges, its cathedral stones, its river carrying its freight of reflected sky. It had stood for centuries. It would stand for centuries more. It did not know or care about the two people on the hill above it, or the long, slow, careful beginning of something that had no name yet. Isolde thought about her mother's journal. He does not show what things cost him, but they cost him. She thought about white flowers tied with black ribbon, left before dawn on a doorstep. She thought about the protector right and 100 years, and the specific gravity of a man who keeps promises. She thought, I am the last Vane. I was raised invisible and I have been found, and I am not frightened. She was not. They drove back to the city in the long, dark car, and she looked out at the old stones, and he looked at the road ahead, and somewhere between the hills and the river he moved his hand from his knee and placed it, very lightly, on the armrest between them. She placed hers beside it, not touching. Close enough to touch. It was the most they had managed. It was, for now, everything.